Ain't anybody. She is your mother. I feel mighty responsible to her for what I have done." "But I did it." "Do you think so? Your mother will not think so. I am going to write to her to day." "You? Write to my mother? Oh, then everything will be so different. They will all—" Molly stopped before the rising visions of Bennington. Upon the fairy tale that she had been living with her cowboy lover broke the voices of the world. She could hear them from afar. She could see the eyes of Bennington watching this man at her side. She could imagine the ears of Bennington listening for slips in his English. There loomed upon her the round of visits which they would have to make. The ringing of the doorbells, the waiting in drawing rooms for the mistress to descend and utter her prepared congratulations, while her secret eye devoured the Virginian's appearance, and his manner of standing and sitting. He would be wearing gloves, instead of fringed gauntlets of buckskin. In a smooth black coat and waistcoat, how could they perceive the man he was? During those short formal interviews, what would they ever find out of the things that she knew about him, the things for which she was proud of him? He would speak shortly and simply. They would say, "Oh, yes," and "How different you must find this from Wyoming." And then, after the door was shut behind his departing back, they would say, "He would be totally underrated, not in the least understood. Why should he be subjected to this? He should never be." Now, in all these half formed, hurried, distressing thoughts which streamed through the girl's mind, she altogether forgot one truth. True it was that the voice of the world would speak as she imagined. True it was that in the eyes of her family and acquaintance this lover of her choice would be examined even more like a specimen than are other lovers upon these occasions. And all accepted lovers have to face this ordeal of being treated like specimens by the other family. But dear me, most of us manage to stand it, don't we? It isn't, perhaps, the most delicious experience that we can recall in connection with our engagement. But it didn't prove fatal. We got through it somehow. We dined with Aunt Jane, and wined with Uncle Joseph, and perhaps had 2 fingers given to us by old Cousin Horatio, whose enormous fortune was of the greatest importance to everybody. And perhaps fragments of the other family's estimate of us subsequently reached our own ears. But if a chosen lover cannot stand being treated as a specimen by the other family, he's a very weak vessel, and not worth any good girl's love. That's all I can say for him. Now the Virginian was scarcely what even his enemy would term a weak vessel, and Molly's jealousy of the impression which he might make upon Bennington was vastly superfluous. She should have known that he would indeed care to make a good impression, but that such anxiety on his part would be wholly for her sake, that in the eyes of her friends she might stand justified in taking him for her wedded husband. So far as he was concerned apart from her, Aunt Jane and Uncle Joseph might say anything they pleased, or think anything they pleased. His character was open for investigation. Judge Henry would vouch for him. This is what he would have said to his sweetheart had she but revealed to him her perturbations. But she did not reveal them, and they were not of the order that he, with his nature, was likely to divine. I do not know what good would have come from her speaking out to him, unless that perfect understanding between lovers which indeed is a good thing. But I do not believe that he could have reassured her, and I am certain that she could not have prevented his writing to her mother. "Well, then," she sighed at last, "if you think so, I will tell her." That sigh of hers, be it well understood, was not only because of those far-off voices which the world would, in consequence of her news, be lifting presently. It came also from bidding farewell to the fairy tale which she must leave now, that land in which she and he had been living close together, alone, unhindered, unmindful of all things. "Yes, you will tell her," said her lover, "and I must tell her too." "Both of us?" questioned the girl. What would he say to her mother? How would her mother like such a letter as he would write to her? Suppose he should misspell a word? Would not sentences from him at this time, written sentences, be a further bar to his welcome acceptance at Bennington? "Why don't you send messages by me?" she asked him. He shook his head. "She is not going to like it anyway," he answered. "I must speak to her direct. It would be like shirking." Molly saw how true his instinct was here, and a little flame shot upward from the glow of her love and pride in him. Oh, if they could all only know that he was like this when you understood him! She did not dare say out to him what her fear was about this letter of his to her mother. She did not dare because, well, because she lacked a little faith. That is it, I am afraid. And for that sin she was her own punishment. For in this day, and in many days to come, the pure joy of her love was vexed and clouded, all through a little lack of faith, while for him, perfect in his faith, his joy was like crystal. "Tell me what you're going to write," she said. He smiled at her. "No." "Aren't you going to let me see it when it's done?" "No." Then a freakish look came into his eyes. "I'll let you see anything I write to other women." And he gave her one of his long kisses. "Let's get through with it together," he suggested, when they were once more in his sick room, that room which she had given to him. "You'll sit one side of the table, and I'll sit the other, and we'll go ahead, and pretty soon it will be done." "Oh dear," she said. "Yes, I suppose that is the best way." And so accordingly they took their places. The inkstand stood between them. Beside each of them she distributed paper enough almost for a presidential message. And pens and pencils were in plenty. Was this not the headquarters of the Bear Creek schoolmarm? "Why, aren't you going to do it in pencil first?" she exclaimed, looking up from her vacant sheet. His pen was moving slowly but steadily. "No, I don't reckon I need to," he answered, with his nose close to the paper. "Oh, damnation, there's a blot." He tore his spoiled beginning in small bits and threw them into the fireplace. "You've got it too full," he commented, and taking the inkstand he tipped a little from it out of the window. She sat lost among her false starts. Had she heard him swear she would not have minded. She rather liked it when he swore. He possessed that quality in his profanity of not offending by it. It is quite wonderful how much worse the same word will sound in one man's lips than in another's. But she did not hear him. Her mind was among a litter of broken sentences. Each thought which she began ran out into the empty air, or came against some stone wall. So there she sat, her eyes now upon that inexorable blank sheet that lay before her, waiting, and now turned with vacant hopelessness upon the sundry objects in the room. And while she thus sat accomplishing nothing, opposite to her the black head bent down, and the steady pen moved from phrase to phrase. She became aware of his gazing at her, flushed and solemn. That strange color of the sea water, which she could never name, was lustrous in his eyes. He was folding his letter. "You have finished?" she said. "Yes." His voice was very quiet. "I feel like an honester man." "Perhaps I can do something tonight at Mrs. Taylor's," she said, looking at her paper. On it were a few words crossed out. This was all she had to show. At this set task in letter writing the cow puncher had greatly excelled the schoolmarm. But that night, while he lay quite fast asleep in his bed, she was keeping vigil in her room at Mrs. Taylor's. Accordingly, the next day those 3 letters departed for the mail, and Mrs. Taylor consequently made her exclamation, "It's come!" On the day before the Virginian returned to take up his work at Judge Henry's ranch, he and Molly announced their news. What Molly said to Mrs. Taylor, and what Mrs. Taylor said to her, is of no interest to us, though it was of much to them.